for legalization. Hey, let me try this one more time. Let's join, of course, Shabaka Kambon, Renee Francois, and Dr. Fergus. Good evening to you, lady and gentlemen.
Good evening, Brother Ruskin. Good evening, and good evening to the listeners on your station 91.1 FM Talk City.
Indeed.
And of course to our viewers and listeners on Facebook and YouTube. Greetings, welcome to this week's program.
And of course, it's a pleasure to be here as always. Dr. Fergus, before we get into things, in the period that we were off air, the governments of the Caribbean went up to the Commonwealth meeting, seeking to advance the discourse on reparatory justice. You are the chair of the Reparatory Justice Committee in Trinidad. I think we should let our audience know how it went on. From what I understand, the Prime Minister of the Labour Party of England said that there would be no apologies.
Well, he's not Prime Minister of the Labour Party, he's Prime Minister
of the country,
of the United Kingdom. Yes, newly appointed Keir Starmer. He is taking the same position as previous Prime Ministers, no reparations, and he insisted no discussion on reparations as well, not even discussion, so he objected to it being on the agenda. However, CARICOM, the CRC in particular, did prepare a memorandum for that meeting, which was actually discussed. You know, there are discussions in the formal forum as well as side discussions and committee discussions and so on. So reparations was discussed. And there was a document, a press release was issued by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in respect of that as well. I think it was a positive report. And a document was prepared. You caught me off guard, so I don't have the document, but
that's all right.
The document was prepared committing to the principles of reparations. And interestingly, the Prime Minister actually signed in the end, although, you know, he had a reservation, but it was a document which addressed certain principles of reparatory justice and so on. He did not commit to reparations, but he did sign as well. So
you're talking about Keir Starmer now, the Prime Minister?
Yes, he signed. He signed on to the document. All member states signed on to the document.
So he said he would not apologize, but signed on the document.
He will not apologize, that Britain will not pay reparations, but in principle, you know, how they approach with regrets and so on, that they would commit to positive policies that would assist in what we would call reparatory development and so on, but they don't want to engage in a formal recognition of the evils they have done through an apology, only in terms of regret. But, you know, CARICOM does not accept regret as apology.
And we shouldn't. But there were two very interesting side developments. The Anglican Church, the chair of the head of the Anglican Church, because I understand he Welby has resigned now over a sex abuse scandal, but he encouraged the King of England and others to address the reparations question before he resigned, and also the president of Venezuela called on the government of the United Kingdom prior to the meeting. No, but he called on the British government to do the right thing by CARICOM and said that he would be approaching the Spanish government, in the vein of what Mexico had done for some kind of apology and perhaps reparatory justice for the indigenous people and others in Venezuela. So
Mexico is a key development, right? And that had been going on since 2019 with the former president. But this president, female president, I think their first female president, I stand corrected, but she is adamant that Spain must apologize and even refused to invite him to her inauguration. And that is what I think got a response from Spain, but they insist they're not going to apologize. The past is the past as far as they're concerned.
Well, I mean, it seems that is the way that things go is that the European powers start off in that perspective, but as
well, we have to understand too that the Dutch government apologized, the Prime Minister and the King, in the way that we expect an apology to be, but the offer of reparation, compensation, really, monetary compensation, was an insult to the people in the former Dutch colonies. They rejected it, although they came around and, in a sense, compromised, but they still considered it an insult, 200 million euros, most of which would be retained in the Netherlands. So that is the position there.
All right, but these are all important. So it's important for our listeners to know,
But there's another element, perhaps just as a footnote, that the new leader of the Conservative, a Nigerian by descent, she was born in England, but spent most of her teenage life in Nigeria, and she has declared emphatically that reparations is a scam, and that no way, she would support reparations. So that is the position of the two major parties.
Yeah, that's a subject. To have an African leader of the British Conservative Party making those kinds of statements is another interesting discussion. But we have Khadija with us. Hi, Khadija, welcome.
Hi, good night.
I hear you have some information for us.
Shabaka, good night to all the viewers.
Good evening. Yes, go ahead.
Hi.
Yes.
Again, an update on the National African History Quiz and Spoken competition.
Beautiful.
So we have completed the preliminary round to the to the semi-final round. This year we saw 24 schools registering the largest number of schools so far in the history of the competition. However, only 21 schools competed. The others dropped off for various reasons, and one of them, every year we happen the same thing, getting a teacher to commit to the competition, because it's 5 weekends, consecutive weekends that they have to come out. So as I always tell the teachers, kudos to them for taking on this, also to the students for taking on this journey. This year we took 25 students from the spoken word competition regional to the nationals, and again that figure dropped down to 20 because of, again, teachers being able to communicate and to some students falling ill. One of I know Shabaka, he loves when students really take on the booklet. There's this young student from, I think it's St. Benedict's, at the orientation session. He just received the booklet, and he came up to me and he was like, "Miss, Thomas Sankara is a goat. Thomas Sankara is the best. Why are we not learning about Thomas in school?" I was caught off guard because, he just received the booklet and already he is so enthusiastic to read the booklet, and even during the competition, he just idolized Thomas Sankara. The first time he's reading about him, and he's just so in love with him, love with this process, what he did for Burkina Faso. So it's really good that the students, get involved in the competition, and they're always grateful that they are getting to learn our history our way, because a lot of these schools that take part in competition, history is not taught in their schools. So out of us one special for committee giving them the information, it's not there for them. And it's just
let me ask Dr. Fergus, because there's one of our great thinkers said something to the effect, tell me if it was Malcolm X, said something to the effect that of all the disciplines, history stands in a position best to reward us if we were to pursue it. Which one of our luminary said that.
You're giving me a test. But the principle of that statement is, I think, what I would want to comment on, right? It's a principle that has been articulated by a number of people who understand the value of history, including people who would have denied us our history. For example, it was said of Eric Williams's Capitalism and Slavery that it changed the whole narrative of decolonization and imperialism, not only in terms of the history of abolition, but it said it admitted that history was the foundational discipline on which the imperialist colonialist narrative was constructed. That book, in a sense, collapsed the narrative so completely that there was no way that imperialism could be sustained on the basis of the colonial narrative anymore.
Yeah, and I'm saying this because I introduced this because I want our listeners to understand how important that history quiz is in terms of waking up our people. But I found the quote is, of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So, Khadija, the work that you guys are doing there with that history quiz is absolutely important in transforming the consciousness and waking up the consciousness, the memory of our people.
Well, I have attended these sessions that she spoke about. I'm there in position as a judge at the sessions. And I really want to, I think this year, in my own memory, this is one of the best years that I've seen students, with their responses, with accurate responses. At one time, I attempted to create a sort of quantitative analysis, how many right answers, how many wrong answers, and so on, But without that specific data, I can say categorically that this year, students were sharp. They were that sharp. With their responses. It was highly competitive. It means sometimes schools were going down head to head, as they say, head to head, no error whatsoever, for 5-6 questions straight, which to me, I don't think that would have happened before. Somebody would have messed up by question number 6, question number 7, lots of tic-tac-toes. That means students were hitting tic-tac-toe by the 3rd question. So I think it's exciting. You need to look at it. The performances, they were excellent. I had to stay back to look at those little ones.
Wow.
But it's material I think we can use in the schools, persuade the schools to use materials, because Shabaka, one of the things you should note as well.
Yes,
Listening to the question that you asked, history, remember, is not taught in most of our schools. Most of our schools. History is not taught. So this is one of the avenues available to students to learn about the history, right? African history is world history.
Indeed.
It's world history. We have to understand that African history is not just about African people. It's world history.
Yeah, but right? I think that we're not just talking about the continent, but also history of African people right here in diaspora, in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think all that is important. When we say African history, we don't exclude, and we're speaking in a Pan-Africanist sense. But I want to ask you just quickly, Khadija, when is the public, the general public, going to get to see these things on television? Because they do air.
On Sunday, the 24th, this Sunday coming here, you can tune into TTT at 10 a.m. for the spoken word competition. We have dubbed it Echo of Reparations because of the pieces, the calypso pieces that was available in the booklet. We did some on reparations. We also did some nation building songs. And again, the youngsters, these are just 6 to 11-year-olds. They're stuck on the topic of reparations as well. So it's giving them a better understanding about, this term reparations that is just being in the public domain right now, and breaking it down for them. So like we have I Want My Grandfather Back Pay by Chogdas, and also Haiti, I'm Sorry by David Rudolph. And again, the emotions of these children, they stick these pieces and owning it. It is so beautiful that they're putting themselves into it. At 4 p.m. also on Tuesday, you can get to view the semi-finals of the African history quiz. The final airing will be on mm, November the 30th, right? Same time, 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on TTT. I must give thanks to Republic Bank Limited through the Policymaker Reference Program. They have been our sponsor since 2012 and they continue to be our sponsor. This year, we also give thanks to Lucas Aid for being one of our sponsors, as well as Little Caesars, Burger King, um, and a pizza. Burger King, yes, for also being our sponsors. And I want to invite the corporate sector to also come on board for the African History Quiz and Spoken competition. It is growing. We have to get our history back into our schools. And Dr. Fergus, just to mention, some of these schools that take part in the competition, or they take our material and they also have emancipation celebrations in their school. So we have San Fernando West, Marlborough North, Holy Faith Convent, Penal. They had a whole thing on Facebook about natural hair. And those events came out of the schools being in the African History Quiz competition.
Yeah, as I said to them, I hope they form a school reparations group as well. I
Yes.
threw that out to them, and hopefully, it will take root somehow.
Yeah.
And even at the prelims, some of the students sign up to volunteer at the Kwanzaa market. So again, we are hoping that that is a start for them to be a part of the organization, for them to come to some of our events. Hopefully, I listen to our lectures. I send them the video clips on YouTube from our Kwame lecture series. So I do hope that they tune in, they listen to get some more information and better understanding, building that cultural awareness and helping them to shape their identity. So that is so important right now with a lot of our young people having, mental issues and not sure, how to develop a way to turn or how to even to deal with it. Because again, that's something so taboo within society. How do we deal with that and this cultural identity that a lot of young people are facing today?
Yeah. I want to say that I attended one of these events where there was a huge one of the emancipation events at the start of the semester where there was a lot of focus on natural hair. And I mean, for me, it's just incredible to pass by any school in the afternoon now and just the amount of African girls with their hair natural and the boys and so on with their, experimenting with different hairstyles and so on. I want to use this opportunity to warn people that the gains that we have made around natural hair are not secure. They're not built on a secure foundation. I have been doing my own investigation, and I know that there are those inside the upper echelons of power who are not happy about the decision that was taken, the historic decision to liberate African hair, and who want to roll back those advances. And so I just
we can have Khadija on and on and on all evening. Khadija, we'll have you back again next week, hopefully.
Yes.
So we want to thank you, and we move on to our next segment in the program.
Yes, indeed. Ah, boy, we have Sister Q with us.
Hi, blessed evening, gentlemen. Please forgive my voice.
Good evening, Empress. Good evening. Yes, Shabaka, I don't know, you ought to have a profile to introduce her. I don't have one.
Well, Empress Q is no stranger to Indaba.
I know, but she still needs to be introduced.
She has
of course, she can introduce herself as well.
I can introduce
myself of this program.
Yes, of course. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Little bit.
So, Empress Q, representing Rastafari, representing Empress Men and Rising, and also the founder of the movement Stay Calm It's a Plant. I've been an activist for cannabis, ganja, since 2012. So way before decriminalization, which happened in 2019. I have worked alongside Rastafari when we did our national rallies, and I'm on the ground in the unregulated illegal cannabis market, actively participating and also encouraging others to, get their hands into this new emerging industry. I just came back from Canada's SVG, St. Vincent and Grenadine, on November 4th. It was November 5th to be fair. So that was my latest kind of foray into regional cannabis. And I'm very excited to talk about that with you all, that experience, and, where Trinidad and Tobago may be headed.
Great, great, great.
Well, we started the conversation last week, sister.
Yes.
Yes.
So I want you to just take off from there and talk and try to bring our listening audience into what came out of that gathering.
Well, firstly, what was very apparent was the coming together of herbalists from across the Caribbean, right? So almost every delegation had a Rastafari elder. They had somebody from their MCA, which would be the Medicinal Cannabis Authority. I'm talking not just about St. Vincent, that is in Antigua, Barbados. I believe St. Lucia may have one, Trinidad and Tobago is obviously behind, but we ourselves need to establish a medical cannabis authority. So there was a Rastafari member of the Cannabis Authority and a legacy platform in many of the delegations. So I thought that even St. Vincent and the Grenadines having that overstanding that many different parts of the community are affected, and also having these different representatives was so um, powerful, so progressive. It was like a coming together of minds because you have the traditional farmers giving their opinion, you have the legal minds coming from also fair trade. CARICOM, I believe, is working on a fair trade group because there were members there who was part of, the discussions and such. Um, we had the Rastafari perspective, who are obviously the ones in the Caribbean perspective most affected by criminalization of cannabis. So that was the first thing, and everybody grounded off immediately on those levels. We got to visit on our day before the conference started. We got to go to two St. Vincent's large producers, which are Medicinal and Summers. And so we got to see commercial cannabis being grown. That was very amazing. I mean, if you are into cannabis, you know that this happens in Colorado and California and obviously in America. But to see it on a small island like St. Vincent, and to know that their growers they have the capacity of growing 8,000 plants at one time, which is over a ton of cannabis once it's harvested. Um, the flip side of that, so interestingly enough, if I could, lend some personal insight here, on the tour, one of the participants was a legacy planter in St. Vincent. So it was so funny because every time we did the tours, the growers and the men who worked on the farms would be like, "That is the man who know about ganja. That guy." So they would be like pointing out the traditional farmer to be like, "He is the guy who really knows about weed." And like, we're just working in this facility, but this man has 30 years of experience. You know what I mean? So,
So
and
you
even
got the impression that there was some acknowledgement of those who had been elders in the industry.
yes, definitely. There was definitely that
And,
aspect,
and in terms of what your experience is in Trinidad, did you see differences, obvious differences?
obvious differences. I mean, we still have not reached to, the conversation before you all were talking about reparations. Um, you all who are following the cannabis discussions throughout the CARICOM, many governments have already issued some sort of apology to Rastafari to say that now that we are burgeoning into the cannabis industry, we are realizing that the criminalization of Rastafari for the last 30, 40 years has been unjust. And as you all know, even that word sound, that apology means something. You know what I mean? There is weight behind that. So Trinidad and Tobago has not even reached that step. Our
Yes.
prime minister,
Funny enough, I'll tell you, and tell me if you agree with this reading of the history. But what I gather is that Rastafarians were persecuted more under independence governments than they were under the colonial authorities. Is that your reading of the history?
To be honest, I'm not. I cannot say I have the knowledge
Well, we
to
have
make a
Fergus
statement of.
here. Let's bring him in.
Yeah, I think he would
Well,
be a.
if it's more or less quantifying it is a difficulty. We have to look at the period of colonialism. The rise of Rastafarianism would
Yeah.
have been more accelerated in Jamaica, slower in the other territories. So you can't look across the board during the colonial period.
Well,
But certainly by independence, Rastafarianism would have been a common religion and movement across the Caribbean. So definitely after independence, you would have had a lot more prejudicial legislation, police harassment, and even at the judicial level, tremendous discrimination, official and unofficial, against Rastafarians across the Caribbean. Even where there were no laws, there was discrimination by the authorities. So definitely it was after independence, but that is because of the way that the movement developed before and after independence.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, what I would add to that is obviously after 1962 was the 1970s. So I think that whole Black Power movement, would have also shadowed Rastafari as also being a revolutionary group, and I would have targeted them even more as being like dissidents to the shit stem, as we say, to Babylon, right?
So,
So so, I could see that, and what I've been told from my elders, and this is a point I want to make on national radio, and that we shall not forget is Rastafari was persecuted, not just incarcerated, but their locks were cut off violently. You know what I mean? These people
yeah,
was
sis,
right.
I just want to make a statement tonight. My father, and I wanna use the opportunity to just salute him tonight. He was one of those early pioneers who, when he was arrested and taken to jail in 1970, he was one of those who objected to having his hair cut, and was therefore one of the pioneers in ending that form of violence against Rastafarians. And
Yes.
so I don't remember the names of the other brothers who were involved, but that was one of the actions that we can credit to the revolutionaries of 1970.
But there's another point that could complement that as well. Rastafarianism, because Rastafarians were associated with dreadlocks, people who were not Rastafarians but also wear locks were also discriminated because of that. So it was that discrimination, to the discrimination of Rastafarians, we should also add locks, dreadlocks, locks. People who wore locks and therefore by association were either sympathizers or perhaps wrongly identified with Rastafarianism fell under the same official and unofficial prejudices because, even in schools, Rastafarians would have suffered there for both religion and the locks, but people who wore the locks alone and
Yes.
were not Rastafarians would have come under the same discrimination. So I think we
Yeah.
need to combine both of them together.
And well, let
Indeed.
me add another aspect of that is as well the hair and um the culture is also the taboo of cannabis added on to Rastafari. So now they're drug users, right? So there is also that stigmatization that using ganja, you are a drug user, right? And you are also introducing your children and your family to drugs, right? So this has been the predominant um, thought in the society's prejudice for the last 40, 50 years,
Yeah.
right? So,
Let's go
right?
back to the event in.
Before you go on there, I want to ask a kind of a different kind of question. I want to ask Empress in particular, from your own perspective as a woman, And two things. One, marijuana is regarded by the Rastafarian community as a sacramental herb, a devotional herb. Is it equally used by women as well as men in the community? And secondly, in terms of the economic aspect of marijuana, how involved are women as beneficiaries of that ecosystem that they are developing, whether it is before legitimization or in the period that followed legitimization? Could you speak to women as participants, as beneficiaries particularly, and in the general use of marijuana as well? Is there a gender difference?
Well, not to be too tongue-in-cheek, but I think that women use marijuana more than men. And the reason for that is, besides sacrament, it is our healing herb. So when we are on free, during our monthly period, we use cannabis more, right? When we are pregnant and carrying children, we use cannabis for morning sickness. We use it for nausea. So I think women use cannabis. And I'm not saying again, well, not again, but I'm not saying necessarily smoking. We can steam it, we can use it as tea, we can put it in our food, right? So there are many ways that we use it, but I do think that women use cannabis more in the Rastafari community. I once can feel free to call in and give or put on the chat, their point of view, but I think so. And secondly, with economics, the women I have found have been more innovative in using ganja to bring in income. So I think the men are primarily planters. They bring in the raw herb, that in itself has a lot of value for smoking. But then the women take the stems and the leaves and we use it to make wine. Or we might draw it and put it in oils and make infused oils, or we may make tinctures. And this is myself. I make these things and sell them,
Yeah.
right? But I also know a lot of women who do as well.
Yeah.
So
Wouldn't
I
it
thought,
be wonderful if Caribbean governments would take the time to analyze the industry at this kind of granular level, and then utilize the research that they have done to develop the way forward?
yes. But before I lose, I want to make this point and make a challenge because I told Bongo Chris this last week. We reasoned a little bit and I said, Bongo Chris, if you could make this point. And the point I want to make is, as we say, woman, I really want to challenge Professor Rosemary Ballantyne, right, who is now the principal of UE, to break through, to make a breakthrough using UE's educational standing to have a health and wellness expo around cannabis. I want Trinidad and Tobago to lead in a downstream economy when it comes to ganja. What I have found in St. Vincent and the Grenadines as well, one uh, short vision, or that I saw, is the people do not have a lot of knowledge about using the herb downstream economy. So a lot of it, what their culture is over there, and I don't know if many people know, but if you know, you know, St. Vincent has been one of the largest producers of cannabis in the Caribbean for many, many years, just like Jamaica. So the traditional planters there, um, and what they're having a negative impact because of legalization. Um, I don't want to talk too much about it because it's not that I've been there long enough to speak on their plight. But what I heard from some of the traditional farmers is, before they used to jump on a boat and drive to nearby Grenada or the trip to Barbados or come through Tobago, right, and bring 50, 100 pounds of ganja, right?
Yeah,
So
Saint
that's
Lucia. Hold on, Saint.
for many years, for decades. This is how they're planters. And St. Vincent is like one of the bread baskets of the Caribbean. They grow a lot of food. Other than cannabis, they grow a lot of food because it's a hilly island, and they have volcanic soil and all of these amazing things that, again, someone hinted about the knowledge. Why is it that the governments are not seeing that every high island has its own terroir, right? As I always get tired with that French word, has its own unique environment ecosystem that lends to a particular strain of cannabis. And Dr. Marshall Emmanuel has said that's the life sciences professor at UW Mona, who is, one of our young pioneers in this legal cannabis industry. One of the things that I love that he has said is cannabis has nostalgia. So it's one thing to say, like in this new Americanized, whitewashed, sterilized dispensary environment, it comes like a drugstore. You come, you browse what you need, they tell you what herb is, good for backache or whatever, and they give it to you. They might give it to you just like medicine, in a bag or whatever, right? But when you smoke herb, or like if you have a herbalist, right? If you have somebody you could go to and say, listen, I'm not feeling well, thing, and the herbalist could say, listen, draw this herb, drink it 3 times a day, or you're having nausea. I want you to smoke this joint, have breakfast and smoke this joint. If you can't eat, drink a little tea to break your gas and smoke half of this and see if you feel to eat. And it's a more intimate, um, I dare say even cultural, as a nostalgic experience when you have that level of interaction with cannabis versus, okay, I walk into a dispensary and that dispensary could be in Holland, it could be in Colorado, it could be, you know what I mean? And it's the same experience. But in the Caribbean, many of us, I started smoking when I was in my 20s. That's the whole story by itself of why I started so late. But it lends to why I became an activist, because I was told a lot of false narratives in my upbringing, and it's only until I broke past those things that I embraced cannabis. Um, but, there is a lot of um, bridges that need to be built, within the society in
Well,
terms of the understanding of not just ganja, but all the herbs in the Caribbean.
yeah, well,
And
Empress, I'm not one who is familiar with the details of the science, but I'll tell you, I was in Dominica, up in the mountains, some years ago, and I met a gentleman, a Rastafarian planter, and he had maybe 6 or 7 children, and 5 of them were island scholarship winners who had been raised on ganja tea and everything produced by the plant. He had strains, of course, from Africa and different parts of the world growing in his backyard. And he knew which ones to share with the kids and thing. And he encouraged me. Of course, I couldn't, without the background of the science, it was difficult for me to consider, giving the ganja to my own son at the time. But the evidence that he had, I mean, it was compelling. He had, out of
yeah,
7 children, 5 of them were island skulls, and he was able to show me pictures of them in different parts of the world, excelling in their various disciplines, and to explain that ganja was at the center of that. I just say that to bring us to the final part of our discussion now. Where are we going to go from here? Having had this meeting, what is the outcome and where are we going from here?
Shabaka, before you go there, one more concern I have. I personally would benefit from it, but I'm sure our listeners as well. Empress, the legal or legalization in Trinidad and Tobago and St. Vincent is different. Trinidad and Tobago, you can use marijuana legally.
yeah, where the
You
criminalized.
cannot go, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the line I want you to go. But you cannot grow for sale commercially or otherwise. In St. Vincent, as far as I understand, it is not legal for use, personal use, but you can cultivate and on even a commercial scale. Could you clarify for me if I'm wrong, or put it in a better context, perhaps the different
Oh,
legalization, and perhaps why? Why are we going down different roads? Why? And what are the implications, in the two
yeah.
different polities?
Well, let me say quickly. So Trinidad and Tobago decriminalized since December 23rd, 2019. You can legally possess and grow 4 trees. You can personally have on your possession in private spaces 30 grams. Um, the entrapment of that law is that you can grow 4 trees, but you can only harvest 30 grams. I don't know what the Attorney General at the time was thinking, but that is an entrapment, right? So the law gives and it takes away. What else? We can smoke in private places, not in public spaces. You still cannot smoke near schools. And all the fines pre-decriminalization have been tripled or quadrupled. So when before trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago under the Dangerous Drugs Act was 1 kilogram of cannabis, which is 2.2 pounds, now anything over 60 grams is considered trafficking and has a fine of up to $3 million, according to the amendments to the law. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they have now, because of their medical cannabis authority, they are offering personal licenses, medical cards. So you can go into a dispensary. I'm not sure what the filling out is, but you do a little, paper thing, or certain pharmacies probably have a pharmacist who is authorized to give you a med card, and you can buy cannabis straight out of his pharmacy. I don't know why, but there are over 300 pharmacies on St. Vincent, right? But I thought that to be a very interesting fact. They can grow. So right now, what one of the issues the traditional farmers are having is they're having a license for traditional farmers, which is only $100 EC, but they have over 8 or 9 licenses. So the license that they possess, traditional farmers, they can only sell their crop to the large companies. Some are so medicinal. So no longer are they entrepreneurs on their own. They now have to come under that thing. Shabaka, you're muted, right?
But
So,
what if you in St. Vincent you caught smoking a stick, whatever you call it, but
yeah.
it did not come from a pharmacy? What happens?
Really, it's so commonplace there. When I say commonplace, you can ask a child. I met people who brought their children to the expo, where we had vendors. I myself got a table. I was allowed to bring some of my merchandise and stuff, so I represented Trinidad and Tobago. But children were there, and if you ask them about cannabis, they say, "Yeah, my uncle is a planter. My grandfather was a planter." St. Vincent has generational legacy planters, right? Whereas in Trinidad and Tobago, we do as well, but they're very small families because it was so heavily criminalized here that eventually some people dropped out, right? Of the legacy of being a ganja planter. So I personally know a few farmers from Moruga and Toto, the east of Trinidad, who would say, yes, my father and my grandfather were ganja planters. But in St. Vincent, I would say at least half the population, at least, know about ganja and are comfortable. Let me say they had this event on Annisfield Stadium, and it started on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And by Saturday, next to the stadium, well, behind the stadium is a secondary school. So I thought all of this to be very amazing because, again, we come from Trinidad and Tobago, and if you smoke near a school, you're sure to get locked up, right? But in St. Vincent, they had a whole cannabis expo with a secondary school next door. On the Saturday, they had a track and field meet next door, with secondary schoolers right there. So that is the kind of progressiveness that I want our people, Caribbean people, especially on the whole, not just Trinidad and Tobago, to wake up and realize cannabis has always been here. It is a healing herb that is indigenous to Africans, the Indians, even we want to go dare say even the first peoples, the Amerindians, those people, I'm sure they know about cannabis somewhere in their medicinal practices. So we need to get rid of this stigma that cannabis is a drug. That's the first thing. Let's just eradicate that mental altogether. And then we can clarify and say, listen, herbs are very good, but we have to know how to use it. But less is more. But at the same time, here the thing, you can't die from it. You can't die from drinking punching, right? You can definitely die from drinking
Let me
punching,
just
but you cannot die from smoking marijuana. Okay.
So let me just play a devil's advocate here for the benefit of those listeners on the outside who think that we're going easy on in this conversation here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's talk. Let's raise this issue of the scientists now playing around with because there's a lot of experimentation taking place with the various strains and so on. And some people are producing strains that have way more CBD, and some are producing strains that have way more THC.
Yeah,
And of course, there are those who say that if you go too far one way, you can find
psychosis.
yourself in some danger zone. How do you
Yeah,
respond to those questions?
I agree. I agree. I as a Rastafari, I am. My life is very simple. Everything the way Jah make it is perfect. It's perfect. Jah made everything perfect, right? So I don't even agree with grafted avocado. I think if Jah wanted avocados to come in 3 years, he would have make it a 3 year avocado. But human beings, right? He gave us so much intellect and this amazing mind. We think that we could do better than the creator. So there are scientists. We don't call them scientists. We call them breeders or strain hunters because what they do is they grow different strains of cannabis and they select the best and then breed the best to keep making a better tree. So it's always about taking the attributes of a plant that you love. You like the smell of this, but you want the strength of this one, and then you join them together. And right. So I have my issues with that because especially when you hear people talk about it, it's always about the high. Cannabis is not, to me, I will never advocate about people using it to get high. If you want to elevate above a certain circumstance, there is a difference. It's like meditation. You don't use meditation to get high, meaning, right? We don't meditate and say, right, I want to transcend this world and just, right? We meditate so that we can have a clarity, we can have a deeper understanding of what the issue is. So same thing with cannabis. We use cannabis sometimes because we're grieving, and then through smoking it, we realize, okay, this is life. We can't hold on to this pain and grief forever, and we let it go, right? So there are lots of plant allies that do this. I also want to advocate for psilocybins, which are mushrooms, right? Psilocybins are plant medicines. They're fungi, again created by the Almighty for us to use.
Yeah, but what would we, because our time is so short,
Yes,
want to go back to that question that I think we're eager to hear from you in terms of coming out of this event.
yes.
What do you see? What do you see happening now that might advance this dialogue one step further?
Well, one thing we all of us said leaving there was every island needs to have a ganja festival. That's the first thing. Cannabis tourism needs to become a regional thing. We can travel Jamaica in January for their ganja festival, then go Barbados. Just like how we have rum and food, we should have cannabis festivals throughout the Caribbean. The second thing is we need to stop relying on America's federal legislation to shadow what we would like to do here in the Caribbean. They are not our government. We are sovereign nations, right? And we could determine for ourselves what we want to do with cannabis. We don't have to wait for America to tell us what it is. All of this is what came out of the reasonings and the conferences that we had there. The third thing is we need to establish industries around our herbal remedies, not just cannabis. We have a lot of medicine here in the
All
Caribbean.
about traditional
Yes,
medicinal knowledge. I think that's a sister. I think that's a great point for us to close on here.
yes,
Independence in terms of our thinking, in terms of examining what we have in front of us, and making decisions for ourselves. And also, taking charge of our entire traditional medicine environment, that knowledge, and utilizing it for the benefit of our people. I think these are brilliant points, and we can take it from there, sister. Thank you very much again for joining us tonight on Indaba. Dr. Fergus, is there anything you want to add to
thank
that?
you
Is
for
there anything
having
we've
me.
missed?
On a light note, I just wanted to insert a lighter incident or culture rather in St. Vincent. I know for a fact, long before even the discussion on legalization, that if two planters had issues, or somebody had an issue, somebody stealing the crop or part of the crop, they would go to the police to report the issue. Somebody has stolen the thing, they interfere with the thing. There's a name that they call it. They didn't say that, but everybody knew the language they were speaking. And the police would call the two parties together to try to resolve the issue, to return the ganja or whatever. It was that liberal.
Yes, it was a
the police understood that.
That was my experience in St. Vincent as well. They had, it was de facto legalized.
And while they cultivated on the hills, wherever you lived in St. Vincent, you could see the crop on the hills. So, it wasn't like Trinidad where you have to get helicopter to go, and survey and spot a patch of ganja. You could see. I often saw these things. I knew that a lot of the sites, you can see the ganja growing in the pots and so on in mountains. So it was not something that people were hiding to cultivate. You selected a nice spot to cultivate, but it wasn't like hiding.
Yeah,
when someone say I'm going up in the mountain, it always meant that they are going to their ganja plantation.
Correct. I think the culture is similar to Jamaica as well, because my experience in Jamaica from early 2006 or so, from my first visit, was de facto legalized, and the only time people were a little wary was in the sight of a policeman. And even that
Prime Minister was their lawyer, Before he became Prime Minister, the Prime Minister was the chief lawyer. Once you got into trouble, you run to the dock, to take your case.
Yeah, I do think, though, that it would have been great to see independent countries in the Caribbean charting their own course on these subjects and making up their mind based on their own research and evidence, and not just taking the carte blanche what was dictated from abroad. I think that's so unfortunate, and that happens in so many different areas across our across so many aspects of our of the work that we were doing in the point of what constituted our independence was dictated like that. So a tragedy, but we continue to be optimistic. And of course, Empress, I know that you and the brothers and sisters who work with you are genuine activists, and we are going to keep our platform available for you all to utilize to bring the message to the wider population. Thank you for joining.
You. And let me say quick again, I know we're running out, but another conversation needs to be had about the endocannabinoid system, about the fact that cannabis is integral to our bodies. So it's not just, it's not
this is a conversation that we do have these conversations ever so often, and we do touch on different aspects of it. And of course, we've had medical doctors and so on come on our program and discuss their findings. So, but again, thank you, sister. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And the listeners may have been curious why no Africa report this evening. I don't think we explained why. Here I am, no Africa report. Well, we have decided, the planning committee for the program, that endeavor that the Africa report will be every other week, except on certain circumstances.
Yeah, let me just ask a quick question related to the continent. I have seen on social media, I haven't had a chance to investigate to see whether or not it has any validity, but Cuban and Venezuelan troops in Senegal, in Burkina Faso. Is that, have you gotten any wind of that, Dr. Fergus?
I saw that on social media. I cannot confirm.
Okay. So we'll I guess, a future Africa report.
Possibly, but I cannot confirm. Some of these things people just spring out of the air, and
sometimes they don't have any real merit.
So I normally would wait until there's some discussion on certain other platforms before I take it seriously. It's possible, and but I'm skeptical, but it is possible.
It is okay.
Cuba has enough problems these days, as you know. They're facing immense difficulties. And while they have, of course, contributed troops to decolonization in so many other parts of Africa. I think that would be a big, tough decision to take now under the current circumstances. Not that it may not happen, but I think it's really a tough call if they should do that right now.
Yeah. I think next week, as long as it's possible. I understand that there's an African festival coming up in Cuba at the end of the year. We talk a little bit about that. But Dr. Fergus, we do have one more subject to raise on tonight's program for those who are not on radio, because we know that radio will sign off any minute now. That's 91.1 Talk City. But those of you who are joining us on Facebook and on YouTube, we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about October 12th and what happened at that time. We were, of course, off air, but Dr. Fergus went to the community in Arima, the indigenous community there, and he participated in their events. Of course, October 12th was originally, or for some time now, Discovery Day. We ended that, it was Discovery Day across the Americas. Trinidad and Tobago had its Discovery Day on August 1st, a very deliberate attempt to derail the celebration of emancipation. But October 12th has always had that significance because it was in October.
But Shabaka, I think we need to be clear on that. Historically, across the Caribbean had their own Discovery Day or Columbus Day. All across the Caribbean, they had these events, but they were on a different day, of course, a different day, celebrating the day when Columbus, passed by. But in Trinidad, we had this curious coincidence where Columbus Day was a day before emancipation was commemorated. And because of the way that the colonials celebrated holidays, they often preferred Monday. So across the Caribbean, August Monday was actually Emancipation Day that they were celebrating. Some say August Monday, some say first Monday in August. For Trinidad, not Tobago, for Trinidad in particular, 1st August or August Monday was often Columbus Day. And that's where the problem came. So they prioritized the Columbus Day. But that was only for Trinidad. Okay, so that attempt to subvert emancipation was purely related to Trinidad. I think we need to make that clear.
Yes, and I think that actually worked out to the benefit of the oppressed people of the Americas, because Columbus Day turned out to be Emancipation Day. When our people woke up to this reality and started the struggle to regain Emancipation Day in the second half of the 20th century, they immediately had to address the question of Columbus Day. And so Trinidad became the first country in the world to rid itself of that the celebration of genocide implied by Discovery Day in 1984. And of course, that struggle that we waged to regain Emancipation Day also sharpened our consciousness and our understanding of the role of Columbus in our history. And certainly that would have been a huge factor which prepared us to make solid contributions to the efforts to end, to undermine the quincentennial celebration that was planned by the United States and the Vatican and other countries in 1992. Trinidad and Tobago had some significant contributions, most high profile perhaps being from Shadow and Stalin, Bundem and Columbus Lai. Of course, there was also others by Brother Resistance and so on. But and thereafter, Trinidad continued to play a role. And I want to make this point this year. I thought we would have Brother Raoul, the Shaman of the Warao community, and Chief Ricardo Bharath on the program. But one of the significant developments that came out of the activism in the early 1990s, which basically turned the quincentennial celebration of Columbus's arrival in the Americas on its head was the the discovery by indigenous people that there was something called a doctrine of discovery, and the efforts to then have that doctrine repealed. And of course, the church did not repeal that, but last year in March they repudiated the doctrine of discovery. And let me just say that the Warao community in particular were part of that struggle. I know when we history is as history is written now, it tends to emphasize the fact that the indigenous people of Canada were central to their protest against for justice for their children who were murdered and molested and so on in the residential schools there. Those protests were what are seen as central to the repeal of the doctrine of discovery. But I want it to be known that since that doctrine of discovery was discovered in the early 1990s by indigenous people, Trinidadians, including Raoul, Simon in particular from the Warao community here, participated in efforts across the Americas to get the church to make that historic step, which they did last year. Dr. Fergus.
Yeah, well, of course, I thought you were going to explain the doctrine itself.
Well, that
no,
naturally is
sometimes we assume that the listening public knows what we're talking about, but just explain a little for them the origin of that and the implication.
Okay, so the doctrine of discovery, which was repudiated by the Vatican on March 30th last year, 2023, is both a legal principle and moral framework. It is derived from a series of 15th and 16th century papal decrees, which are called bulls. Chief among them, one Dum Diversas, 1452, Romanus Pontifex, 1455, and Inter Caetera, 1493. But there are about 9 in all. And collectively, what these papal decrees called for was for non-Christian peoples to be invaded, and I'm quoting from the bulls now, invaded, captured, vanquished, subdued, reduced to perpetual slavery, and have their possessions and property seized. So all the things that Christopher Columbus initiated when he came to the Caribbean, which of course the history books tried to suggest was not on his agenda, turned out to be precisely on his agenda. And they were part of the agenda that was handed to him by the Catholic Church, and they were promoted during the occupation, that period of the early period of the, of course, not just the early period, but throughout the colonial process. And of course, they became enshrined in the laws of the main white settler colonial colonies across the world. So South Africa, Australia, the United States of America, and Canada. They were enshrined in the legal apparatus, the doctrine of discovery, in different ways that made it hard for indigenous people to own the land that they had occupied for the last few hundred years. Made it easier for them to be dispossessed of that land that they had occupied since time immemorial. So so it was a huge development that the Vatican would acknowledge that this doctrine was was central to the colonial enterprise, and that they would repudiate it, and that the Pope Francis himself would condemn the colonizing mentality that was displayed at the time of the invasion of the Caribbean by Christopher Columbus. So huge development. And again, the Warao community in Trinidad and Tobago was part of that historic development. They contributed to that historical development through years of advocacy and that, of course, is all part of what plays into the advocacy, for the removal of the Columbus Monument and the removal of his 3 ships from the coat of arms. All these things are part of the historical process that leads to that decision by the Prime Minister, this year in August.
Right. So I just want to add a little bit to that because that was perfectly articulated. We have to go beyond the church. As you indicated, this was embedded in law as well. So we have to recognize that the government of Spain, first of all, would have articulated in royal decrees, the most prominent being one that is translated the requirement, where, or el requerimiento, which was promulgated in 1513, and that's of course just at the dawn of the expansion of Europe into the Caribbean. The Americas had not been conquered yet. So this decree applied specifically at the time to the Caribbean, where native peoples were, the demand was made for native peoples to submit immediately upon being told to submit to the authority of king and pope, which means to the soldiers, the invaders. Otherwise, they would be taken into captivity. Their wives, their children would be raped and so on. All kinds of horrors would be visited upon them. This was stated in black and white. So that was the one of the follow-up to the theological aspect of the doctrine of discovery. You also have all other European powers adopting the same principle into their law. And the Anglican Church was also foremost in adopting the principle, in other words, taking over where the Roman Catholic Church left out. In the 17th century, they came up with the doctrine of the English people as the new Israelites, with the right, to inherit the earth. They were the chosen people. That was articulated by Anglican clergy, especially in North America. And as late as the 19th century, the United States articulated their own version of it as manifest destiny, which perhaps they still perpetuate. So we need to see how these things operate even today in perpetuating white supremacy around the world, this right to dominate the rest of the people that they call the inferior races of the earth. So it's a continuing principle. So the repeal by the Catholic Church is not enough. It's significant, but it's not enough. So until we see a repudiation of that doctrine of the right of white Western European peoples to rule other people, we have not reached the end. We are still engaged in the same struggle. So
well, we're seeing the
milestone, but we still have a long, long way to go.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to use our October 12th commemoration tonight, since we're talking about that period here. And by the way, I flew to Guyana to speak there on October 12th itself, and then I spoke at the Indigenous Festival in South put on by the Raoul community on the 13th. Because that day is important, across the Americas. That day there would have been protests in Spain itself. Hundreds of and thousands of indigenous people and conscientious Spaniards themselves would have taken to the streets on October 12th to remind their government how they feel about the role that they played in the decimation of indigenous people across the Americas, starting in 1492. So it's a very significant development. And of course, you are right in saying that these things still apply. I'm aware from my own research that there was a case in up to 2011. I'm aware of a case where the doctrine of discovery was applied in a fight, standoff with indigenous people and one of the states in the United States of America, to dispossess them of their land. And of course, we see the attitude of the doctrine of discovery in Palestine, in what is today that genocidal matter taking place before our eyes. That is the application. That is exactly how the doctrine of discovery looks when it is applied.
Or even informally, the right to appropriate the minerals of Africa, for example, just to go in, and believe that they have a right to the resources of Africa. That was one of the principles that they had articulated during the scramble for Africa, that in the interest of humanity, Europeans have to exercise sovereign control over Africa.
Yeah, I heard one person explain it this way. So to simplify it for our audience, right? The people who live outside of Europe, especially those who live in some area where there's some resources, are like fish around a particular bank in the ocean. That particular group of fish run that bank until the fisherman gets there, and then it's the fisherman's bank. They just happen to be swimming there, and of course he'll utilize them how he sees fit. That is precisely that's what the doctrine of discovery looked like in its application, over the last 500 years, those imperialist centuries.
Exactly. The scramble for Africa was an expression of that doctrine. When the French left the colonies, that colonial pact that they imposed on them was the declaration of that same principle, that it's our right to rule over you. It's our right to your resources.
And that's why, Dr. Fergus, I want to salute all those in Trinidad who took the position over the years, who supported the Freedom Project, who supported our work when we took on the issue of the monuments to Christopher Columbus, who took on that struggle to call for the repeal of the doctrine of discovery, and who raised the issue of the coat of arms to such an extent that the government felt it was in their best interest to remove Columbus's 3 ships from the coat of arms. I think this year, October 12th, that was the message that I shared, that salutation, thanking the people who supported us, thanking the people who worked independently of us in aid of that work, for their contribution to moving our society one step forward, with the removal of that symbol of genocide, replacing a symbol of genocide with a symbol of freedom on our coat of arms. I can't think of a better way, a better gift for the Day of Indigenous Resistance than that in 2024.
Indeed. And I would say, in concluding, that perhaps when these same Europeans and the Americans and others who ought to submit to our call for reparations, until that time, that we are not going to consider that the doctrine of discovery has been repudiated. If they should apologize and commit, because remember, reparations is about apology first, and a declaration of non-repetition of the evils that they had imposed on people. So in a sense, if you can make that declaration, Shabaka, it means you are effectively repudiating that doctrine of discovery. Of course, that is something we can debate, but effectively it is a repudiation, and that's one of the reasons they don't want to do it. Yeah, they understand the implication.
Well, we have to. I think your sentiment squares with that of many indigenous leaders. When it was announced, the repudiation was announced. They felt that repudiation needed to come with some kind of pecuniary measures to repair, some attempts to repair all that had been destroyed by such, and I'm quoting here their words, an evil doctrine. But I think, I like to celebrate every step forward And I know it would not have been easy for the hierarchy in the Catholic Church to make that decision. And I know those who made that decision, would up to today be still fighting for their survival, because there are other elements in the church who felt that that was a step too far to admit that they played such a central role in the colonial process, and to admit that the decrees of the popes from the mid 15th century right into the 16th century were were awful and do not fit within the way that their worldview, the worldview they want to project now. These are significant steps, I think. And while I agree they need more needs to be done, I think we have to celebrate every step in the right direction. Of course, I'm well aware that when the Catholic Church, in that same document where they repudiated the doctrine, they tried to claim that there was a papal decree in 1494, 1495, which would have nullified the 9 or so bulls that came before. But Native American leaders had done their research and pointed out that the very next year, which would have been 1496 or 1497, there would have been another papal decree which would have returned the church and the colonizers to the status quo. And of course we could go into all those details when we have time. That's for another program. So there are attempts within the hierarchy of the church, we could say, to cover up still, even while they are admitting the historical wrongs. But I think we have to take every positive step and to be encouraged by it, and to give credit to those who have the courage to confront the past in such a manner, because that is where we need to begin to free the future.
I fully agree with you that we need to celebrate every milestone, because it's a long struggle we have been engaged in. It's not a struggle that began now. We are simply carrying on where others would have left off. And they are signaling us to close the program. So I just want to go back to where we started, in terms of the Chogam Declaration. And what was said was that the time has come for conversation. This is the document that the Prime Minister put his signature to. The time has come for a discussion on reparations. So again, as you said, that is a small step, but it's also worthy of celebrating that we got to move the needle just a little bit. And of course, by continuing to move a little bit, we are going to get to where we want to get. That the British government must apologize. They must apologize. And they must talk about how they're going to offer reparations in the manner in which the CARICOM Reparations Commission, the CARICOM heads of government want reparations to be carried out. Not the way that the British government wants it, but the way that we want. So it is time to negotiate as well. It has to reach to that point to negotiate. So I would, so I quite agree with you. But, Shabaka, one of the things that the Catholic Church has to come to terms with is the continued imposition of those white supremacist images upon our people. The deification of white supremacy through these images, the white Jesus, the white Mary. We are coming up to Christmas time, and they are going to swamp this place with creches all over the place, with white Mary, the white Jesus. We have to confront this eventually, whether we like it or not. We have to confront these images. It's a primary tool of colonizing our minds, enslaving our minds, our intellect. We have to come to terms with that, whether we like it or not. It is a sensitive topic, perhaps too sensitive to end the conversation with, but it is a sensitive topic. But we need to get to that point Hanging these little images over our little babies in the cribs and so on is the earliest indoctrination into white supremacy. And then we wonder why is it that our people hate ourselves. We are so dysfunctional. We have to come to terms with that. That is the last frontier that we have to confront in the Roman Catholic Church. We have to deal with that.
Well, Doc, I hear the pain and the concern in your sentiment, and I understand, deeply, where it's coming from. But I also want to take this opportunity as we're closing Indaba tonight to salute all our allies, all those people who have, over the years, from the dominant racial castes, who see the injustice that have been done to those in those who have been marginalized in the colonial process and exploited, and who work with us to seek racial justice in the 21st century. I want to take this opportunity to salute allyship tonight, and all those who work with us. I know there is growing pressure within the core of the world that we've inherited from the colonial period, for allies to stop doing the work and giving the support that they have. And I think we need to every now and then to acknowledge that those efforts as well, to support the racial justice work that we've been doing. So as a way to close the program tonight, Doc. Back to you. And
by being our allies, they're also helping themselves. Huh? We are the greatest contributors to humanizing the world, and they're benefiting from that alliance with us. We are grateful, yes, but they're also benefiting directly. They're humanizing themselves. They need it.
Well, Doc, I think we can leave Indaba there for tonight. I look forward to joining you again next week, Wednesday, on another edition of Indaba. And of course, you know what Fanon said, that he believed in us in the Caribbean, and he wanted us to move beyond what he called the nauseating mimicry of Europe, to present something to the world that would advance civilization one step further. So he had,
yes. Let's move them to Ubuntu philosophy, Shabaka. Let's move them to Ubuntu philosophy.
An idea of us that we need to incorporate in ourselves, that belief in the fact that we do have something great to contribute to the world. And I think we could leave it there. Good night, Doctor. Yes. One love to you. Good night to Renee, Khadijah, Sister Zakia, the chair of the Emancipation Support Committee, and all our listeners on the outside.
See you next week.